Sexual violence is unfortunately common in our society. That means most of us bring myths and misconceptions to the discussion. So before we chat with youth about this important topic, let's check some of the common myths surrounding sexual violence. They were asking for it wearing that dress. This is a tempting one. It tempts us with the promise that if we dress or act a certain way, we'll be immune from sexual violence. It's something humans like to do to reassure ourselves that we will never experience something so awful. If I don't wear short skirts, no one will rape me. If I wear long skirts, no one will want to touch me. It's not about desire gone astray, it's about power. People have always been sexually assaulted, regardless of the fashions that were in style at the time. So while we can console ourselves that we will never be assaulted because we do this, the truth is anyone can experience sexual violence and they're not at fault for it. They were asking for it walking alone at night. This is another variation of the "if I do this, I won't get raped" myth. It also suggests that most rapists use darkness, alleyways, and secluded areas to take advantage of people. This can happen, and it does happen. If not walking at night makes you feel better in some way, then by all means keep doing that. However, it won't lead to a reduction in sexual violence because unfortunately most people actually know the perpetrator of the crime. So unfortunately, not walking alone at night won't protect you from someone you know. They were asking for it drinking until they passed out. It is true that some folks experience sexual violence while being inebriated. While it's another version of "if I do this, I won't get raped" strategy, the problem is that we're placing blame on the victim or survivor rather than the perpetrator of the crime. In Canada, it is against the law to engage in any kind of sexual activity with someone when they cannot give consent because they're too inebriated. So anyone who engages in sexual activity with someone who's in this state is knowingly committing assault, whether or not that person agrees verbally. A yes in this situation is not enough. It's about waiting until the person's sober. We need to change our anger from "how could you get this drunk" to "how could you do that when they were so drunk?" They were asking for it. I mean, they didn't say no. Traumatic experiences affect people in different ways. So some of us fight, some of us flee, and some of us freeze. There's no way to tell what we may do in a given situation, but it's very likely that it'll be either fight, flee, or freeze. Regardless of whether a victim or survivor fights, flees, or freezes, they are still experiencing a traumatic event. And of course, some of the options may not be available to us in all situations. I mean, we may want to fight, but the perpetrator has a gun. Or we may want to flee, but the perpetrator won't let us go. And of course, it's very common for people to freeze in order to survive a traumatic event. This is a perfectly natural reaction. And some people feel that if they stay still, less physical harm will come to them. Every situation is different, but more often than not, the victim or survivor is made vulnerable by something outside their control. So we should never expect victims or survivors to overpower someone who's bent on taking advantage of them. Instead, we should expect that people with any sort of power over another person exercises responsibility for their actions. Probably a lie. I mean, women cry rape all the time. Research has shown that only a tiny fraction of accusations about sexual violence are false. It's about 1 to 3% depending on the statistic used, which means that about 97% of the people who say they've been assaulted have actually been assaulted. Statistically, you should believe everyone because it's most likely the truth. Given that only 10% of victims and survivors actually report their assault, it's likely that many people you know have been assaulted but have never actually told anyone. I mean, it's common for people in nursing homes or long-term care facilities to disclose sexual assault for the first time in their lives. And of course, given how we blame victims and survivors, this isn't surprising. I mean, why would you pour out your soul to someone if there was a chance that someone would blame you for the event? So not only should you believe anyone who tells you they've been the victim of a sexual assault, you should assume that many people you meet have already experienced it but have never told anyone. People must lie about sexual assaults. I mean, their stories change so much. So first off, memories do not record like videos, and they don't play in order, detail for detail, or fact for fact. Memories are more like a bunch of cards that are thrown into a box and your brain decides to save some of them for later and not necessarily in any particular order. And And of course, this is on a good day. When we experience a traumatic event, even without physical activity, trauma may show and develop in different ways. Some details of the event may be delayed or even triggered by a smell or a taste years later. This normal brain activity is really unfortunate because the legal system is a fan of facts that are cut and dried and told in order. And of course, it also doesn't like iffy changes to stories. But there is a lot of great research out there about the brain, memory, and trauma. Learn more if you want to, but just remember that trauma does funny things to an already funny way of thinking and remembering. If a woman says no, someone just has to convince her to say yes. Many of our romantic stories and movies revolve around passionate men chasing not-so-convinced women. It's common to believe that a no is only a yes that needs more convincing, so think Pepe Le Pew. While it may be obvious that consent comes from a sober person who's not at gunpoint, it's not so obvious that coercion and manipulation aren't consent either. By not respecting someone's response, whether they're a man or a woman, we're violating their rights to have an opinion about what they want. We're also putting people, including girls and women, at risk for being stopped by men who think that no means, convince me until I give in. When we refuse to take no for an answer, we shouldn't assume that any yes is given freely and enthusiastically. Some people like it rough. Okay, this part is true-ish. Some folks like activities that involve pain or domination. However, these people are still consenting adults who are engaging in activities that they mutually engage in together, with consent. A person can like their sexual activities with bondage and other rough play, but still be assaulted sexually. Because sexual assault is anything done without consent. It's not about rough sex. It's about overpowering someone who has not consented to that activity. If a person has already agreed to sex, then it's not assault. Consent can be withdrawn at any time, even if you love the person. There was a time husbands who assaulted their wives were not charged because it was assumed it was a wife's duty to please her husband. Today in Canada, any sexual activity done without consent is assault, period. If you love someone, you'll make sure that they're enthusiastic about any kind of activity you do together. Even if they marry you, buy a lobster dinner, bring you flowers, you do not have to consent to any kind of sexual activity with them. As a society, we have many myths and misconceptions about sexual violence, so it's important to get talking with your kids so we can uncover some of these myths together.